Once upon a time, there were two brothers who lived in the same house, and the big brother listened to his wife's words, and because of them fell out with the little one. Summer had begun, and the time for sowing the high-growing millet had come. The little brother had no grain, and asked the big one to loan him some, and the big one ordered his wife to give it to him. But she took the grain, put it in a large pot, and cooked it until it was done. Then she gave it to the little fellow. He knew nothing about it, and went and sowed his field with it. Yet, since the grain had been cooked, it did not sprout. Only a single grain of seed had not been cooked, so only a single sprout shot up. The little brother was hard-working and industrious by nature, and hence he watered and hoed the sprout all day long, and the sprout grew mightily, like a tree, and an ear of millet sprang up out of it like a canopy, large enough to shade half an acre of ground. In the fall, the ear was ripe. Then the little brother took his axe and chopped it down. But no sooner had the ear fallen to the ground than an enormous rock came rushing down, took the ear in his beak and flew away. The little brother ran after him as far as the shore of the sea. Then the bird turned and spoke to him like a human being as follows: "You should not seek to harm me. What is this one ear worth to you? East of the sea is the Isle of Gold and Silver. I will carry you across. There you may take whatever you want and become very rich." The little brother was satisfied and climbed on the bird's back, and the latter told him to close his eyes. So he only heard the air whistling past his ears, as though he were driving through a strong wind, and beneath him the roar and surge of flood and waves. Suddenly the bird settled on a rock. "Here we are," he said. Then the little brother opened his eyes and looked about him, and on all sides he saw nothing but the radiance and shimmer of all sorts of white and yellow objects. He took about a dozen of the little things and hid them in his breast. "Have you enough?" asked the rock. "Yes, I have enough," he replied. "That is well," answered the bird. "Moderation protects one from harm." Then he once more took him up and carried him back again. When the little brother reached home, he bought himself a good piece of ground in the course of time and became quite well-to-do. But his brother was jealous of him and said to him harshly, "Where did you manage to steal the money?" So the little one told him the whole truth of the matter. Then the big brother went home and took counsel with his wife. "Nothing easier," said his wife. "I will just cook grain again and keep back one seedling so that it is not done. Then you shall sow it, and we will see what happens." No sooner said than done. And sure enough, a single sprout shot up, and sure enough, the sprout bore a single ear of millet, and when harvest time came around, the rock again appeared and carried it off in his beak. The big brother was pleased and ran after him, and the rock said the same thing he had said before, and carried the big brother to the island. There the big brother saw the gold and silver heaped up everywhere. The largest pieces were like hills, the small ones were like bricks, and the real tiny ones were like grains of sand. They blinded his eyes. He only regretted that he knew of no way by which he could move mountains. So he bent down and picked up as many pieces as possible. The rock said, "Now you have enough. You will overtax your strength." "Have patience, but a little while longer," said the big brother. "Do not be in such a hurry. I must get a few more pieces." And thus time passed. The rock again urged him to make haste. "The sun will appear in a moment," said he, "and the sun is so hot it burns human beings up." "Wait just a little while longer," said the big brother. But that very moment a red disk broke through the clouds with tremendous power. The rock flew into the sea, stretched out both his wings, and beat the water with them in order to escape the heat. But the big brother was shriveled up by the sun. Note: This fairy tale is traditionally narrated. The rock is called Pong in Chinese, and the treasures on the island are spoken of as all sorts of yellow and white objects, because the little fellow does not know that they are gold and silver. The Three Rimsters. Once there were 3 daughters in a family. The oldest one married a physician, the second one married a magistrate, but the third, who was more than usually intelligent and a clever talker, married a farmer. Now it chanced, once upon a time, that their parents were celebrating a birthday. So the 3 daughters came, together with their husbands, to wish them long life and happiness. The parents-in-law prepared a meal for their 3 sons-in-law and put the birthday wine on the table. But the oldest son-in-law, who knew that the third one had not attended school, wanted to embarrass him. "It is far too tiresome," said he, "just to sit here drinking. Let us have a drinking game. Each one of us must invent a verse, one that rhymes and makes sense, on the words in the sky, on the earth, at the table, in the room, and whoever cannot do so must empty 3 glasses as a punishment." All the company were satisfied. Only the third son-in-law felt embarrassed and insisted on leaving. But the guests would not let him go and obliged him to keep his seat. Then the oldest son-in-law began. "I will make a start with my verse. Here it is. In the sky the phoenix proudly flies. On the earth the lambkin tamely lies. At the table through an ancient book I wade. In the room I softly call the maid." The second one continued. "And I say, in the sky the turtle dove flies round. On the earth the ox paws up the ground. At the table one studies the deeds of yore. In the room the maid she sweeps the floor." But the third son-in-law stuttered and found nothing to say, and when all of them insisted, he broke out in rough tones of voice. "In the sky flies a leaden bullet. On the earth stalks a tiger beast. On the table lies a pair of scissors. In the room I call the stable boy." The other 2 sons-in-law clapped their hands and began to laugh loudly. "Why, the 4 lines do not rhyme at all," said they. "And, besides, they do not make sense. A leaden bullet is no bird. The stable boy does his work outside. Would you call him into the room? Nonsense, nonsense. Drink." Yet before they had finished speaking, the third daughter raised the curtain of the women's room and stepped out. She was angry, yet she could not suppress a smile. "How so do our lines not make sense?" said she. "Listen a moment, and I'll explain them to you. In the sky, our leaden bullet will shoot your phoenix and your turtle dove. On the earth, our tiger beast will devour your sheep and your ox. On the table, our pair of scissors will cut up all your old books. And finally, in the room, well, the stable boy can marry your maid." Then the oldest son-in-law said, "Well scolded. Sister-in-law, you know how to talk. If you were a man, you would have had your degree long ago. And, as a punishment, we will empty our 3 glasses. Note, this is also a fairy tale traditionally handed down." Once upon a time there was an old woman who had 2 sons, but her oldest son did not love his parents and left his mother and brother. The younger one served her so faithfully, however, that all the people spoke of his filial affection. One day it happened that there was a theatrical performance given outside the village. The younger son started to carry his mother there on his back so that she might look on. But there was a ravine before the village, and he slipped and fell down in the middle of it. And his mother was killed by the rolling stones, and her blood and flesh were sprinkled about everywhere. The son stroked his mother's corpse and wept bitterly. He was about to kill himself when, suddenly, he saw a priest standing before him. The latter said, "Have no fear, for I can bring your mother back to life again." And as he said so, he stooped, gathered up her flesh and bones, and laid them together as they should be. Then he breathed upon them, and at once the mother was alive again. This made the son very happy, and he thanked the priest on his knees. Yet on a sharp point of rock he still saw a bit of his mother's flesh hanging, a bit about an inch long. "That should not be left hanging there either," said he, and hid it in his breast. "In truth, you love your mother as a son should," said the priest. Then he bade the son give him the bit of flesh, kneaded a manikin out of it, breathed upon it, and in a minute there it stood. A really fine-looking little boy. "His name is Small Prophet," said he, turning to the son, "and you may call him brother. You are poor, and have not the wherewithal with which to nourish your mother. If you need something, Small Prophet can get it for you." The son thanked him once more, then took his mother on his back again, and his new little brother by the hand, and went home. And when he said to Small Prophet, "Bring meat and wine," then meat and wine were at hand at once, and steaming rice was already cooking in the pot. And when he said to Small Prophet, "Bring money and cloth," then his purse filled itself with money, and the chests were heaped up with cloth to the brim. Whatever he asked for that he received. Thus, in the course of time, they came to be very well off indeed. But his older brother envied him greatly. And when there was another theatrical performance in the village, he took his mother on his back by force and went to it. And when he reached the ravine, he slipped purposely, and let his mother fall into the depths, only intent to see that she really was shattered into fragments. And sure enough, his mother had such a bad fall that her limbs and trunk were strewn around in all directions. He then climbed down, took his mother's head in his hands, and pretended to weep. And at once the priest was on hand again, and said, "I can wake the dead to life again, and surround white bones with flesh and blood." Then he did as he had done before, and the mother came to life again. But the older brother already had hidden one of her ribs on purpose. He now pulled it out and said to the priest, "Here is a bone left. What shall I do with it?" The priest took the bone, enclosed it in lime and earth, breathed upon it, as he had done the other time, and it became a little man, resembling Small Prophet, but larger in stature. "His name is Great Duty," he told his older brother. "If you stick to him, he will always lend you a hand." The son took his mother back again, and Great Duty walked beside him. When he came to their courtyard door, he saw his younger brother coming out, holding Small Prophet in his arms. "Where are you going?" he said to him. His brother answered, "Small Prophet is a divine being who does not wish to dwell for all time among men. He wants to fly back to the heavens, and so I am escorting him." "Give Small Prophet to me. Don't let him get away," cried the older brother. Yet, before he had ended his speech, Small Prophet was rising in the air. The older brother then quickly let his mother drop on the ground and stretched out his hand to catch Small Prophet, but he did not succeed. And now Great Duty too rose from the ground, took Small Prophet's hand, and together they ascended to the clouds and disappeared. Then the older brother stamped on the ground and said with a sigh, "Alas, I have lost my Great Duty because I was too greedy for that Small Prophet." Note, in China, usually on festive days or because of some religious celebration, a provisional stage is erected before the village or temple, and a play given. Permanent theatres are to be found only in the large cities. Once upon a time there were 10 farmers who were crossing a field together. They were surprised by a heavy thunderstorm, and took refuge in a half-ruined temple. But the thunder drew ever nearer, and so great was the tumult that the air trembled about them. while the lightning flew around the temple in a continuous circle. The farmers were greatly frightened and thought that there must be a sinner among them whom the lightning would strike. In order to find out who it might be, they agreed to hang their straw hats up before the door, and he whose hat was blown away was to yield himself up to his fate. No sooner were the hats outside than one of them was blown away, and the rest thrust its unfortunate owner out of doors without pity. But as soon as he had left the temple, the lightning ceased circling around and struck it with a crash. The one whom the rest had thrust out had been the only righteous one among them, and for his sake the lightning had spared the temple. So the other 9 had to pay for their hard-heartedness with their lives. Note: a traditionally narrated fairy tale. The Magic Cask. Once upon a time there was a man who dug up a big earthenware cask in his field. So he took it home with him and told his wife to clean it out. But when his wife started brushing the inside of the cask suddenly began to fill itself with brushes. No matter how many were taken out, others kept on taking their place. So the man sold the brushes, and the family managed to live quite comfortably. Once a coin fell into the cask by mistake. At once the brushes disappeared, and the cask began to fill itself with money. So now the family became rich, for they could take as much money out of the cask as ever they wished. Now the man had an old grandfather at home, who was weak and shaky. Since there was nothing else he could do, his grandson set him to work shoveling money out of the cask. And when the old grandfather grew weary and could not keep on, he would fall into a rage and shout at him angrily, telling him he was lazy and did not want to work. One day, however, the old man's strength gave out, and he fell into the cask and died. At once the money disappeared, and the whole cask began to fill itself with dead grandfathers. Then the man had to pull them all out and have them buried, and for this purpose he had to use up again all the money he had received. And when he was through, the cask broke, and he was just as poor as before. Note: the Magic Cask is a traditionally narrated tale. In northern China, wooden casks or barrels are unknown. Large vessels opened at the top, of earth or stone, are used to hold water and other liquids. The favourite of fortune and the child of ill luck. Once upon a time there was a proud prince who had a daughter, but the daughter was a child of ill luck. When it came time for her to marry, she had all her suitors assemble before her father's palace. She was going to throw down a ball of red silk among them, and whoever caught it was to be her husband. Now there were many princes and counts gathered before the castle, and in their midst there was also a beggar. And the princess could see dragons crawling into his ears and crawling out again from his nostrils, for he was a child of luck. So she threw the ball to the beggar, and he caught it. Her father asked angrily, "Why did you throw the ball into the beggar's hands?" "He is a favourite of fortune," said the princess. "I will marry him, and then perhaps I will share in his good luck." But her father would not hear of it, and since she insisted, he drove her from the castle in his rage. So the princess had to go off with the beggar. She dwelt with him in a little hut, and had to hunt for herbs and roots, and cook them herself, so that they might have something to eat, and often they both went hungry. One day her husband said to her, "I will set out and seek my fortune, and when I have found it, I will come back again and fetch you." The princess was willing, and he went away and was gone for 18 years. Meanwhile, the princess lived in want and affliction, for her father remained hard and merciless. If her mother had not secretly given her food and money, no doubt she would have starved to death during all that time. But the beggar found his fortune, and at length became emperor. He returned and stood before his wife, She, however, no longer recognized him. She only knew that he was the powerful emperor. He asked her how she were getting along. "Why do you ask me how I am getting along?" she replied. "I am too far beneath your notice." "And who may your husband be?" "My husband was a beggar. He went away to seek his fortune. That was 18 years ago, and he has not yet returned." "And what have you done during all those long years?" "I have been waiting for him to return." "Do you wish to marry someone else, seeing that he has been missing so long?" "No, I will remain his wife until I die." When the emperor saw how faithful his wife was, he told her who he was, had her clothed in magnificent garments, and took her with him to his imperial palace. And there they lived in splendor and happiness. After a few days, the emperor said to his wife, "We spend every day in festivities, as though every day were New Year." "And why should we not celebrate?" answered his wife, "since we have now become emperor and empress?" Yet his wife was a child of ill luck. When she had been empress no more than 18 days, she fell sick and died. But her husband lived for many a long year. Note, the favorite of fortune and the child of ill luck is a traditionally narrated fairy tale. The dragon is the symbol of imperial rule, and the New Year's feasts, which old and young celebrate for weeks, is the greatest of Chinese festivals. Long ago, there once lived a king and a queen who had a daughter. One day, when the daughter went walking in the garden, a tremendous storm suddenly came up and carried her away with it. Now the storm had come from the bird with 9 heads who had robbed the princess and brought her to his cave. The king did not know whither his daughter had disappeared, so he had proclaimed throughout the land, "Whoever brings back the princess may have her for his bride." Now, a youth had seen the bird as he was carrying the princess to his cave. This cave, though, was in the middle of a sheer wall of rock. One could not climb up to it from below, nor could one climb down to it from above. And as the youth was walking around the rock, another youth came along and asked him what he was doing there. So the first youth told him that the bird with 9 heads had carried off the king's daughter and had brought her up to his cave. The other chap knew what he had to do. He called together his friends, and they lowered the youth to the cave in a basket. And when he went into the cave, he saw the king's daughter sitting there, and washing the wound of the bird with 9 heads, for the hound of heaven had bitten off his 10th head, and his wound was still bleeding. The princess, however, motioned to the youth to hide, and he did so. When the king's daughter had washed his wound and bandaged it, the bird with 9 heads felt so comfortable that one after another all his 9 heads fell asleep. Then the youth stepped forth from his hiding place and cut off his 9 heads with a sword. But the king's daughter said, "It would be best if you were hauled up first, and I came after." "No," said the youth, "I will wait below here until you are in safety." At first the king's daughter was not willing, yet at last she allowed herself to be persuaded and climbed into the basket. But before she did so, she took a long pin from her hair, broke it into 2 halves, and gave him one and kept the other. She also divided her silken kerchief with him, and told him to take good care of both her gifts. But when the other man had drawn up the king's daughter, he took her along with him, and left the youth in the cave, in spite of all his calling and pleading. The youth now took a walk about the cave. There he saw a number of maidens, all of whom had been carried off by the bird with 9 heads, and who had perished there of hunger. And on the wall hung a fish, nailed against it with 4 nails. When he touched the fish, the latter turned into a handsome youth who thanked him for delivering him, and they agreed to regard each other as brothers. Soon the first youth grew very hungry. He stepped out in front of the cave to search for food, but only stones were lying there. Then, suddenly, he saw a great dragon who was licking a stone. The youth imitated him, and before long his hunger had disappeared. He next asked the dragon how he could get away from the cave, and the dragon nodded his head in the direction of his tail, as much as to say he should seat himself upon it. So he climbed up, and in the twinkling of an eye he was down on the ground, and the dragon had disappeared. He then went on until he found a tortoise shell full of beautiful pearls. But they were magic pearls, for if you flung them into the fire ceased to burn. And if you flung them into the water divided, and you could walk through the midst of it. The youth took the pearls out of the tortoise shell and put them in his pocket. Not long after he reached the seashore. Here he flung a pearl into the sea, and at once the waters divided, and he could see the sea dragon. The sea dragon cried, "Who is disturbing me here in my own kingdom?" The youth answered, "I found pearls in a tortoise shell, and have flung one into the sea, and now the waters have divided for me." "If that is the case," said the dragon, "then come into the sea with me, and we will live there together." Then the youth recognized him for the same dragon whom he had seen in the cave, and with him was the youth with whom he had formed a bond of brotherhood. He was the dragon's son. "Since you have saved my son and become his brother, I am your father," said the old dragon, and he entertained him hospitably with food and wine. One day his friends said to him, "My father is sure to want to reward you, but accept no money nor any jewels from him, but only the little gourd flask over yonder. With it you can conjure up whatever you wish." And, sure enough, the old dragon asked him what he wanted by way of a reward, and the youth answered, "I want no money nor any jewels. All I want is the little gourd flask over yonder." At first the dragon did not wish to give it up, but at last he did let him have it after all. And then the youth left the dragon's castle. When he set his foot on dry land again, he felt hungry. At once a table stood before him, covered with a fine and plenteous meal. He ate and drank. After he had gone on a while, he felt weary, and there stood an ass waiting for him, on which he mounted. After he had ridden for a while, the ass's gait seemed too uneven, and along came a wagon into which he climbed. But the wagon shook him up too greatly, and he thought, "If I only had a litter, that would suit me better." No more had he thought so than the litter came along, and he seated himself in it, and the bearers carried him to the city in which dwelt the king, the queen, and their daughter. When the other youth had brought back the king's daughter, it was decided to hold the wedding. But the king's daughter was not willing and said, "He is not the right man. My deliverer will come and bring with him half of the long pin for my hair and half my silken kerchief as a token." But when the youth did not appear for so long a time, and the other one pressed the king grew impatient and said, "The wedding shall take place tomorrow." Then the king's daughter went sadly through the streets of the city, and searched in the hope of finding her deliverer, and this was on the very day that the litter arrived. The king's daughter saw the half of her silken handkerchief in the youth's hand, and filled with joy, she led him to her father. There he had to show his half of the long pin, which fitted the other exactly. And then the king was convinced that he was the right, true deliverer. The false bridegroom was now punished, the wedding celebrated, and they lived in peace and happiness till the end of their days. Note, the bird with 9 heads is a traditionally narrated fairy tale. The long hair needle is an example of the halved jewel used as a sign of recognition by lovers. See? Number 68. Yang Gui Fei, the fish. In the cave is the dragon's son, for like East Indian Nagarajas, the Chinese dragons are often sea gods. Gourd flasks often occur as magic talismans in Chinese fairy tales, and spirits who serve their owners are often imprisoned in them. See No. 81. Once upon a time, there was a family in which there were 7 daughters. One day, when the father went out to gather wood, he found 7 wild duck eggs. He brought them home, but did not think of giving any to his children, intending to eat them himself with his wife. In the evening, the oldest daughter woke up and asked her mother what she was cooking. The mother said, "I am cooking wild duck eggs. I will give you one, but you must not let your sisters know." And so she gave her one. Then the second daughter woke up and asked her mother what she was cooking. She said, "Wild duck eggs. If you will not tell your sisters, I'll give you one." And so it went. At last the daughters had eaten all the eggs, and there were none left. In the morning the father was very angry with the children and said, "Who wants to go along to grandmother?" But he intended to lead the children into the mountains and let the wolves devour them there. The older daughters suspected this and said, "We are not going along." But the 2 younger ones said, "We will go with you." And so they drove off with their father. After they had driven a good ways, they asked, "Will we soon get to grandmother's house?" "Right away," said their father. And when they had reached the mountains, he told them, "Wait here. I will drive into the village ahead of you and tell grandmother that you are coming." And then he drove off with the donkey cart. They waited and waited, but their father did not come. At last they decided that their father would not come back to fetch them, and that he had left them alone in the mountains. So they went further and further into the hills, seeking a shelter for the night. Then they spied a great stone. This they selected for a pillow and rolled it over to the place where they were going to lie down to sleep. And then they saw that the stone was the door to a cave. There was a light in the cave, and they went into it. The light they had seen came from the many precious stones and jewels of every sort in the cave, which belonged to a wolf and a fox. They had a number of jars of precious stones and pearls that shone by night. The girls said, "What a lovely cave this is! We will lie right down and go to bed." For there stood 2 golden beds with gold-embroidered covers, so they lay down and fell asleep. During the night the wolf and fox came home, and the wolf said, "I smell human flesh." But the fox replied, "Oh, nonsense! There are no human beings who can enter our cave. We lock it up too well for that." The wolf said, "Very well. Then let us lie down in our beds and sleep." But the fox answered, "Let us curl up in the kettles on the hearth. They still hold a little warmth from the fire." The one kettle was of gold and the other of silver, and they curled up in them. When the girls rose early in the morning, they saw the wolf and the fox lying there and were much frightened. And they put the covers on the kettles and heaped a number of big stones on them, so that the wolf and the fox could not get out again. Then they made a fire. The wolf and the fox said, "Oh, how nice and warm it is this morning! How does that happen?" But at length it grew too hot for them. Then they noticed that the 2 girls had kindled a fire, and they cried, "Let us out! We will give you lots of precious stones and lots of gold, and will do you no harm." But the girls would not listen to them, and kept on making a bigger fire. So that was the end of the wolf and the fox in the kettles. Then the girls lived happily for a number of days in the cave. But their father was seized with a longing for his daughters, and he went into the mountains to look for them. and he sat right down on the stone in front of the cave to rest, and tapped his pipe against it to empty the ashes. Then the girls within called out, "Who is knocking at our door?" And the father said, "Are those not my daughters' voices?" While the daughters replied, "Is that not our father's voice?" Then they pushed aside the stone and saw that it was their father, and their father was glad to see them once more. He was much surprised to think that they should have chanced on this cave full of precious stones, and they told him the whole story. Then their father fetched people to help him carry home the jewels. And when they got home, his wife wondered where he had obtained all these treasures. So the father and daughters told her everything, and they became a very wealthy family and lived happily to the end of their days. Note: the Cave of the Beasts is traditionally narrated. The Panther. Once upon a time there was a widow who had 2 daughters and a little son, and one day the mother said to her daughters, "Take good care of the house, for I am going to see grandmother, together with your little brother." So the daughters promised her they would do so, and their mother went off. On her way, a panther met her and asked where she were going. She said, "I am going with my child to see my mother." "Will you not rest a bit?" asked the panther. "No," said she, "it is already late, and it is a long road to where my mother lives." But the panther did not cease urging her, and finally she gave in and sat down by the roadside. "I will comb your hair a bit," said the panther. And the woman allowed the panther to comb her hair. But as he passed his claws through her hair, he tore off a bit of her skin and devoured it. "Stop!" cried the woman. "The way you comb my hair hurts." But the panther tore off a much larger piece of skin. Now the woman wanted to call for help, but the panther seized and devoured her. Then he turned on her little son and killed him too, put on the woman's clothes, and laid the child's bones, which he had not yet devoured, in her basket. After that he went to the woman's home, where her 2 daughters were, and called in at the door. "Open the door, daughters. Mother has come home." But they looked out through a crack and said, "Our mother's eyes are not so large as yours." Then the panther said, "I have been to grandmother's house and saw her hens laying eggs. That pleases me, and is the reason why my eyes have grown so large. Our mother had no spots in her face such as you have. Grandmother had no spare bed, so I had to sleep on the peas, and they pressed themselves into my face. Our mother's feet are not so large as yours. Stupid things. That comes from walking such a distance. Come, open the door quickly." Then the daughters said to each other, "It must be our mother," and they opened the door. But when the panther came in, they saw it was not really their mother after all. At evening, when the daughters were already in bed, the panther was still gnawing the bones he had brought with him. Then the daughters asked, "Mother, what are you eating?" "I'm eating beets," was the answer. Then the daughters said, "Oh, Mother, give us some of your beets too. We are so hungry." "No," was the reply, "I will not give you any. Now be quiet and go to sleep." But the daughters kept on begging until the false mother gave them a little finger. And then they saw that it was their little brother's finger, and they said to each other, "We must make haste to escape, else he will eat us as well." And with that they ran out of the door, climbed up into a tree in the yard, and called down to the false mother, "Come out! We can see our neighbor's son celebrating his wedding." But it was the middle of the night. Then the mother came out, and when she saw that they were sitting in the tree, she called out angrily, "Why?" "I'm not able to climb," the daughters said. "Get into a basket and throw us the rope, and we will draw you up." The mother did as they said, but when the basket was halfway up, they began to swing it back and forth and bump it against the tree. Then the false mother had to turn into a panther again, lest she fall down. and the panther leaped out of the basket and ran away. Gradually daylight came. The daughters climbed down, seated themselves on the doorstep, and cried for their mother. And a needle vendor came by and asked them why they were crying. "A panther has devoured our mother and our brother," said the girls. "He has gone now, but he is sure to return and devour us as well." Then the needle vendor gave them a pair of needles and said, "Stick these needles in the cushion of the armchair with the points up." The girls thanked him and went on crying. Soon a scorpion catcher came by, and he asked them why they were crying. "A panther has devoured our mother and brother," said the girls. "He has gone now, but he is sure to return and devour us as well." The man gave them a scorpion and said, "Put it behind the hearth in the kitchen." The girls thanked him and went on crying. Then an egg seller came by and asked them why they were crying. "A panther has devoured our mother and our brother," said the girls. "He has gone now, but he is sure to return and devour us as well." So he gave them an egg and said, "Lay it beneath the ashes in the hearth." The girls thanked him and went on crying. Then a dealer in turtles came by, and they told him their tale. He gave them a turtle and said, "Put it in the water barrel in the yard." And then a man came by who sold wooden clubs. He asked them why they were crying, and they told him the whole story. Then he gave them 2 wooden clubs and said, "Hang them up over the door to the street." The girls thanked him and did as the men had told them. In the evening the panther came home. He sat down in the armchair in the room. Then the needles in the cushion stuck into him. So he ran into the kitchen to light the fire and see what had jabbed him so. And then it was that the scorpion hooked his sting into his hand. And when at last the fire was burning, the egg burst and spurted into one of his eyes, which was blinded. So he ran out into the yard and dipped his hand into the water barrel in order to cool it, and then the turtle bit it off. And when in his pain he ran out through the door into the street, the wooden clubs fell on his head, and that was the end of him. Note: the panther. In this tale is in reality the same beast as the talking silver fox in number 49, and the fairy tale is made up of motifs to be found in Little Red Riding Hood, The Wolf and the 7 Kids, and The Vagabonds. The Great Flood. Once upon a time there was a widow who had a child, and the child was a kind-hearted boy of whom everyone was fond. One day he said to his mother, "All the other children have a grandmother, but I have none, and that makes me feel very sad." "We will hunt up a grandmother for you," said his mother. Now it once happened that an old beggar woman came to the house, who was very old and feeble, and when the child saw her, he said to her, "You shall be my grandmother." And he went to his mother and said, "There is a beggar woman outside, whom I want for my grandmother." And his mother was willing and called her into the house, though the old woman was very dirty. So the boy said to his mother, "Come, let us wash grandmother." And they washed the woman. But she had a great many burrs in her hair, so they picked them all out and put them in a jar, and they filled the whole jar. Then the grandmother said, "Do not throw them away, but bury them in the garden, and you must not dig them up again before the great flood comes." "When is the great flood coming?" asked the boy. "When the eyes of the 2 stone lions in front of the prison grow red, then the great flood will come," said the grandmother. So the boy went to look at the lions, but their eyes were not yet red. And the grandmother also said to him, "Make a little wooden ship and keep it in a little box." And this the boy did, and he ran to the prison every day and looked at the lions, much to the astonishment of the people in the street. One day, as he passed the chicken butcher's shop, the butcher asked him why he was always running to the lions. And the boy said, "When the lion's eyes grow red, then the great flood will come." But the butcher laughed at him, and the following morning, quite early, he took some chicken blood and rubbed it on the lion's eyes. When the boy saw that the lion's eyes were red, he ran swiftly home and told his mother and grandmother. And then his grandmother said, "Dig up the jar quickly and take the little ship out of its box." And when they dug up the jar, it was filled with the purest pearls, and the little ship grew larger and larger, like a real ship. Then the grandmother said, "Take the jar with you and get into the ship. And when the great flood comes, then you may save all the animals that are driven into it, but human beings with their black heads you are not to save." So they climbed into the ship, and the grandmother suddenly disappeared. Now it began to rain, and the rain kept falling more and more heavily from the heavens. Finally, there were no longer any single drops falling, but just one big sheet of water which flooded everything. Then a dog came drifting along, and they saved him in their ship. Soon after came a pair of mice with their little ones, loudly squeaking in their fear. And these they also saved. The water was already rising to the roofs of the houses, and on one roof stood a cat, arching her back and mewing pitifully. They took the cat into the ship too. Yet the flood increased and rose to the tops of the trees. And in one tree sat a raven, beating his wings and cawing loudly, and him too they took in. Finally, a swarm of bees came flying their way. The little creatures were quite wet and could hardly fly. So they took in the bees on their ship. At last a man with black hair floated by on the waves. The boy said, "Mother, let us save him too." But the mother did not want to do so. "Did not grandmother tell us that we must save no black-headed human beings?" But the boy answered, "We will save the man in spite of that. I feel sorry for him and cannot bear to see him drifting along in the water." So they also saved the man. Gradually the water subsided. Then they got out of their ship and parted from the man and the beasts, and the ship grew small again, and they put it away in its box. But the man was filled with a desire for the pearls. He went to the judge and entered a complaint against the boy and his mother, and they were both thrown into jail. Then the mice came and dug a hole in the wall. And the dog came through the hole and brought them meat, and the cat brought them bread. So they did not have to hunger in their prison. But the raven flew off and returned with a letter for the judge. The letter had been written by a god, and it said, "I wandered about in the world of men disguised as a beggar woman, and this boy and his mother took me in. The boy treated me like his own grandmother, and did not shrink from washing me when I was dirty. Because of this, I saved them out of the great flood, by means of which I destroyed the sinful city wherein they dwelt. Do you, O judge, free them, or misfortune shall be your portion." So the judge had them brought before him, and asked what they had done, and how they had made their way through the flood. Then they told him everything, and what they said agreed with the god's letter. So the judge punished their accuser and set them both at liberty. When the boy had grown up, he came to a city of many people, and it was said that the princess intended to take a husband. But in order to find the right man, she had veiled herself and seated herself in a litter, and she had had the litter, together with many others, carried into the marketplace. In every litter sat a veiled woman, and the princess was in their midst. And whoever hit upon the right litter, he was to get the princess for his bride. So the youth went there too, and when he reached the marketplace, he saw the bees whom he had saved from the great flood, all swarming about a certain litter. Up he stepped to it, and sure enough, the princess was sitting in it. And then their wedding was celebrated, and they lived happily ever afterward. Note, the great flood is traditionally narrated, and a Diluvian legend seems to underlie it. Compare with Grimm's fairy tale No. 73, The Queen of the Bees. The Fox and the Tiger. Once a fox met a tiger. The latter bared his teeth, stretched out his claws, and was about to devour him. But the fox spoke and said, "My dear sir, you must not think that you are the only king of beasts. Your courage does not compare with my own. Let us walk together, and do you keep behind me. And if men catch sight of me and do not fear me, then you may devour me." The tiger was willing, and so the fox led him along a broad highway. But the travellers, when they saw the tiger in the distance, were all frightened and ran away. Then the fox said, "How about it? I went in advance, and the men saw me and had not as yet seen you." And thereupon the tiger drew in his tail and ran away himself. The tiger had remarked quite well that the men were afraid of the fox, but he had not noticed that the fox had borrowed the terror he inspired from him. Note: this universally known fable is traditionally narrated. Animal fables are very rare in China. The tiger as his decoy is something we read about in the storybooks, and grandfathers talk about a good deal too. So there must be some truth in it. It is said that when a tiger devours a human being, the latter's spirit cannot free itself, and that the tiger then uses it for a decoy. When he goes out to seek his prey, the spirit of the man he has devoured must go before him to hide him so that people cannot see him. And the spirit is apt to change itself into a beautiful girl, or a lump of gold, or a bolt of silk. All sorts of deceptions are used to lure folk into the mountain gorges. Then the tiger comes along and devours his victim, and the new spirit must serve as his decoy. The old spirit's time of service is over, and it may go. And so it continues, turn by turn. Probably that is why they say of people who are forced to yield themselves up to cunning and powerful men in order that others may be harmed, they are the tiger's decoys. Note: this tale is traditionally narrated. The Fox and the Raven. The fox knows how to flatter and how to play many cunning tricks. Once upon a time he saw a raven who alighted on a tree with a piece of meat in his beak. The fox seated himself beneath the tree, looked up at him, and began to praise him. "Your color," he began, "is pure black. This proves to me that you possess all the wisdom of Lao Tzu, who knows how to shroud his learning in darkness. The manner in which you manage to feed your mother shows that your filial affection equals that which the master de song had for his parents. Your voice is rough and strong. It proves that you have the courage with which King Hiang once drove his foes to flight by the mere sound of his voice. In truth, you are the king of birds." The raven, hearing this, was filled with joy and said, "I thank you. I thank you." And before he knew it, the meat fell to earth from his opened beak. The fox caught it up, devoured it, and then said, laughing, "Make note of this, my dear sir. If someone praises you without occasion, he is sure to have a reason for doing so." Note: traditionally narrated, it may be taken for granted that this is simply a Aesop's fable in Chinese dress. The manner of presentation is characteristically Chinese. For the wisdom of Lao Tzu, compare p. 30, the Ancients' Book of Wisdom and Life, who sees his light yet dwells in darkness. Master De Song was King Dici's most faithful pupil, renowned for his piety. The raven is known in China as the bird of filial love, for it is said that the young ravens bring forth the food they have eaten from their beaks again, in order to feed the old birds. Why dog and cat are enemies. Once upon a time there was a man and his wife, and they had a ring of gold. It was a lucky ring, and whoever owned it always had enough to live on. But this they did not know, and hence sold the ring for a small sum. But no sooner was the ring gone than they began to grow poorer and poorer, and at last did not know when they would get their next meal. They had a dog and a cat, and these had to go hungry as well. Then the two animals took counsel together as to how they might restore to their owners their former good fortune. At length the dog hit upon an idea. "They must have the ring back again," he said to the cat. The cat answered, "The ring has been carefully locked up in the chest, where no one can get at it." "You must catch a mouse," said the dog, "and the mouse must gnaw a hole in the chest and fetch out the ring. And if she does not want to, say that you will bite her to death, and you will see that she will do it." This advice pleased the cat, and she caught a mouse. Then she wanted to go to the house in which stood the chest, and the dog came after. They came to a broad river. And since the cat could not swim, the dog took her on his back and swam across with her. Then the cat carried the mouse to the house in which the chest stood. The mouse gnawed a hole in the chest and fetched out the ring. The cat put the ring in her mouth and went back to the river, where the dog was waiting for her, and swam across with her. Then they started out together for home, in order to bring the lucky ring to their master and mistress. But the dog could only run along the ground when there was a house in the way. He always had to go around it. The cat, however, quickly climbed over the roof, and so she reached home long before the dog and brought the ring to her master. Then her master said to his wife, "What a good creature the cat is! We will always give her enough to eat and care for her as though she were our own child." But when the dog came home, they beat him and scolded him, because he had not helped to bring home the ring again. And the cat sat by the fireplace, purred, and said never a word. Then the dog grew angry at the cat, because she had robbed him of his reward, and when he saw her, he chased her and tried to seize her. And ever since that day, cat and dog are enemies. Note: why dog and cat are enemies. This fairy tale is given in the current popular version, Legends of the Gods. Before the earth was separated from the heavens, all there was a great ball of watery vapor called chaos. And at that time the spirits of the 5 elemental powers took shape and became the 5 ancients. The first was called the Yellow Ancient, and he was the ruler of the earth. The second was called the Red Lord, and he was the ruler of the fire. The third was called the Dark Lord, and he was the ruler of the water. The fourth was known as the Wood Prince, and he was the ruler of the wood. The fifth was called the Mother of Metals, and ruled over them. These 5 ancients set all their primal spirit into motion, so that water and earth sank down. The heavens floated upward, and the earth grew firm in the depths. Then they allowed the waters to gather into rivers and seas, and hills and plains made their appearance. So the heavens opened, and the earth was divided. And there were sun, moon, and all the stars, wind, clouds, rain, and dew. The Yellow Ancient set earth's purest power, spinning in a circle, and added the effect of fire and water thereto. Then there came forth grasses and trees, birds and beasts, and the tribes of the serpents and insects, fishes and turtles. The Wood Prince and the Mother of Metals combined light and darkness, and thus created the human race as men and women. And thus the world gradually came to be. At that time there was one who was known as the true prince of the Jasper Castle. He had acquired the art of sorcery through the cultivation of magic. the five ancients begged him to rule as the supreme god. He dwelt above the 33 heavens, and the jasper castle of white jade with golden gates was his. Before him stood the stewards of the 28 houses of the moon, and the gods of the thunders, and the great bear. And, in addition, a class of baneful gods, whose influence was evil and deadly. They all aided the true prince of the Jasper Castle to rule over the 1,000 tribes under the heavens, and to deal out life and death, fortune and misfortune. The lord of the Jasper Castle is now known as the Great God, the White Jade Ruler. The five ancients withdrew after they had done their work, and thereafter lived in quiet purity. The Red Lord dwells in the south as the god of fire. The Dark Lord dwells in the north as the mighty master of the somber polar skies. He lived in a castle of liquid crystal. In later ages, he sent Confucius down upon earth as a saint. Hence this saint is known as the Son of Crystal. The Wood Prince dwells in the east. He is honored as the Green Lord, and watches over the coming into being of all creatures. In him lives the power of spring, and he is the god of love. The Mother of Metals dwells in the west, by the Sea of Jasper, and is also known as the Queen Mother of the West. She leads the rounds of the fairies and watches over change and growth. The Yellow Ancient dwells in the middle. He is always going about in the world in order to save and to help those in any distress. The first time he came to earth, he was the Yellow Lord who taught mankind all sorts of arts. In his later years, he fathomed the meaning of the world on the ethereal mount and flew up to the radiant sun. Under the rule of the Zhou dynasty, he was born again as Li Ul, and when he was born, his hair and beard were white, for which reason he was called Lao Tse, old child. He wrote the book of meaning and life and spread his teachings through the world. He is honored as the head of Taoism. At the beginning of the reign of the Han dynasty, he again appeared as the old man of the river, Hou Shanggong. He spread the teachings of Tao abroad mightily, so that from that time on, Taoism flourished greatly. These doctrines are known to this day as the teachings of the Yellow Ancient. There is also a saying, first Lao Tse was, then the heavens were, and that must mean that Lao Tse was that very same Yellow Ancient of primal days. Note how the five ancients became men. This fairy tale, the first of the legends of the gods, is given in the version current among the people. In it, the 5 elemental spirits of earth, fire, water, wood and metal are brought into connection with a creation myth. Prince of the Jasper Castle, or the White Jade Ruler, Yu Huangdi, is the popular Chinese synonym for the Good Lord. The phrase White Jade serves merely to express his dignity. All in all, there are 32 other Yu Huangs, among whom he is the highest. He may be compared to Indra, who dwells in a heaven that also comprises 33 halls. The astronomic relationship between the two is very evident. The herd boy was the child of poor people. When he was 12 years old, he took service with a farmer to herd his cow. After a few years, the cow had grown large and fat, and her hair shone like yellow gold. She must have been a cow of the gods. One day, while he had her out at pasture in the mountains, she suddenly began to speak to the herd boy in a human voice as follows, "This is the 7th day. Now the White Jade Ruler has 9 daughters, who bathe this day in the sea of heaven. The 7th daughter is beautiful and wise beyond all measure, She spins the cloud silk for the king and queen of heaven and presides over the weaving which maidens do on earth. It is for this reason she is called the weaving maiden, and if you go and take away her clothes while she bathes, you may become her husband and gain immortality." "But she is up in heaven," said the herd boy. "And how can I get there?" "I will carry you there," answered the yellow cow. So the herd boy climbed on the cow's back. In a moment, clouds began to stream out of her hoofs, and she rose into the air. About his ears there was a whistling like the sound of the wind, and they flew along as swiftly as lightning. Suddenly the cow stopped. "Now we are here," said she. Then round about him the herd boy saw forests of chrysoprase and trees of jade. The grass was of jasper, and the flowers of coral. In the midst of all this splendor lay a great 4-square sea, covering some 500 acres. Its green waves rose and fell, and fishes with golden scales were swimming about in it. In addition, there were countless magic birds who winged above it and sang. Even in the distance, the herd boy could see the 9 maidens in the water. They had all laid down their clothes on the shore. "Take the red clothes quickly," said the cow, "and hide away with them in the forest. And though she ask you for them, never so sweetly, do not give them back to her until she has promised to become your wife." Then the herd boy hastily got down from the cow's back, seized the red clothes and ran away. At the same moment the 9 maidens noticed him and were much frightened. "O youth, whence do you come that you dare to take our clothes?" they cried. "Put them down again quickly." But the herd boy did not let what they said trouble him, but crouched down behind one of the jade trees. Then 8 of the maidens hastily came ashore and drew on their clothes. "Our 7th sister," said they, "whom heaven has destined to be yours, has come to you. We will leave her alone with you." The weaving maiden was still crouching in the water, but the herd boy stood before her and laughed. "If you will promise to be my wife," said he, "then I will give you your clothes." But this did not suit the weaving maiden. "I am a daughter of the ruler of the gods," said she, "and may not marry without his command. Give back my clothes to me quickly, or else my father will punish you." Then the yellow cow said, "You have been destined for each other by fate, and I will be glad to arrange your marriage, and your father, the ruler of the gods, will make no objection. Of that I am sure." The weaving maiden replied, "You are an unreasoning animal. How could you arrange our marriage?" The cow said, "Do you see that old willow tree there on the shore? Just give it a trial and ask it. If the willow tree speaks, then heaven wishes your union." And the weaving maiden asked the willow. The willow replied in a human voice, "This is the 7th day. The herd boy his court to the weaver doth pay." And the weaving maiden was satisfied with the verdict. The herd boy laid down her clothes and went on ahead. The weaving maiden drew them on and followed him. And thus they became man and wife. But after 7 days she took leave of him. "The ruler of heaven has ordered me to look after my weaving," said she. "If I delay too long, I fear that he will punish me. Yet, although we have to part now, we will meet again in spite of it." When she had said these words, she really went away. The herd boy ran after her, but when he was quite near, she took one of the long needles from her hair and drew a line with it right across the sky, and this line turned into the Silver River. And thus they now stand, separated by the river, and watch for one another. And since that time they meet once every year, on the eve of the 7th day. When that time comes, then all the crows in the world of men come flying and form a bridge over which the weaving maiden crosses the Silver River. And on that day you will not see a single crow in the trees, from morning to night, no doubt, because of the reason I have mentioned. And besides, a fine rain often falls on the evening of the seventh day. Then the women and old grandmothers say to one another, "Those are the tears which the herd boy and the weaving maiden shed at parting." And for this reason, the seventh day is a rain festival. To the west of the Silver River is the constellation of the Weaving Maiden, consisting of 3 stars. And directly in front of it are 3 other stars in the form of a triangle. It is said that once the herd boy was angry because the Weaving Maiden had not wished to cross the Silver River and had thrown his yoke at her, which fell down just in front of her feet. East of the Silver River is the herd boy's constellation, consisting of 6 stars. To one side of it are countless little stars which form a constellation pointed at both ends and somewhat broader in the middle. It is said that the Weaving Maiden, in turn, threw her spindle at the herd boy, but that she did not hit him, the spindle falling down to one side of him. Note, the herd boy and the Weaving Maiden is retold after an oral source. The herd boy is a constellation in Aquila, the Weaving Maiden one in Lyra. The Silver River, which separates them, is the Milky Way. The 7th day of the 7th month is the festival of their reunion. The ruler of the heavens has 9 daughters in all, who dwell in the 9 heavens. The oldest married Li Dishingkump, Notsha, no. 18. The second is the mother of young Oalangkub, no. 17. The third is the mother of the planet Jupiter Kump, Skyodorn, no. 34. And the 4th dwelt with a pious and industrious scholar by name of Dung Yang, whom she aided to win riches and honor. The 7th is the spinner, and the 9th had to dwell on earth as a slave because of some transgression of which she had been guilty. Of the 5th, the 6th, and the 8th daughters nothing further is known. The second daughter of the ruler of heaven once came down upon the earth and secretly became the wife of a mortal man named Yang, and when she returned to heaven, she was blessed with a son. But the ruler of heaven was very angry at this desecration of the heavenly halls. He banished her to earth and covered her with the Wu-Ai hills. Her son, however, Olang by name, the nephew of the ruler of heaven, was extraordinarily gifted by nature. By the time he was full grown, he had learned the magic art of being able to control 8 times 9 transformations. He could make himself invisible, or could assume the shape of birds and beasts, grasses, flowers, snakes and fishes, as he chose. He also knew how to empty out seas and remove mountains from one place to another. So he went to the Wu-Ai hills and rescued his mother, whom he took on his back and carried away. They stopped to rest on a flat ledge of rock. Then the mother said, "I am very thirsty." Orlang climbed down into the valley in order to fetch her water, and some time passed before he returned. When he did, his mother was no longer there. He searched eagerly, but on the rock lay only her skin and bones and a few bloodstains. Now you must know that at that time there were still 10 suns in the heavens, glowing and burning like fire. The daughter of heaven, it is true, was divine by nature, yet because she had incurred the anger of her father and had been banished to earth, her magic powers had failed her. Then, too, she had been imprisoned so long beneath the hills in the dark that, coming out suddenly into the sunlight, she had been devoured by its blinding radiance. When Awalang thought of his mother's sad end, his heart ached. He took 2 mountains on his shoulders, pursued the suns, and crushed them to death between the mountains. And whenever he had crushed another sun disk, he picked up a fresh mountain. In this way he had already slain 9 of the 10 sons, and there was but one left. And, as Wilhelm pursued him relentlessly, he hid himself in his distress beneath the leaves of the portulaca plant. But there was a rainworm close by who betrayed his hiding place and kept repeating, "There he is! There he is!" Wilhelm was about to seize him when a messenger from the ruler of the heaven suddenly descended from the skies with a command, "Sky! Air and earth need the sunshine. You must allow this one sun to live, so that all created beings may live. Yet, because you rescued your mother and showed yourself to be a good son, you shall be a god and be my bodyguard in the highest heaven, and shall rule over good and evil in the mortal world, and have power over devils and demons." When Wilhelm received this command, he ascended to heaven. Then the sun disk came out again from beneath the portulaca leaves, and out of gratitude, since the plant had saved him, he bestowed upon it the gift of a free, blooming nature, and ordained that it never need fear the sunshine. To this very day, one may see on the lower side of the portulaca leaves quite delicate little white pearls. They are the sunshine that remained hanging to the leaves when the sun hid under them. But the sun pursues the rainworm when he ventures forth out of the ground, and dries him up as a punishment for his treachery. Since that time, young Wilhelm has been honored as a god. He has oblique, sharply marked eyebrows, and holds a double-bladed, 3-pointed sword in his hand. 2 servants stand beside him with a falcon and a hound, for young Wilhelm is a great hunter. The falcon is the falcon of the gods, and the hound is the hound of the gods. When brute creatures gain possession of magic powers or demons oppress men, he subdues them by means of the falcon and hound. Note, young Wilhelm is a huntsman, as is indicated by his falcon and hound. His hound of the heavens, literally the divine biting hound, recalls the hound of Indra. The myth that there were originally 10 suns in the skies, of whom 9 were shot down by an archer, is also placed in the period of the ruler Yao. In that story, the archer is named Hu-I, or I-Comp, No, 19. Here, instead of the shooting down of the suns with arrows, we have the Titan motive of destruction with the mountains. The oldest daughter of the ruler of heaven had married the great general Li Dixing. Her sons were named Gincha, Mucha, and Notsha. But when Notsha was given her, she dreamed at night that a Taoist priest came into her chamber and said, "Swiftly receive the heavenly sun." And straightway a radiant pearl glowed within her, and she was so frightened at her dream that she awoke. And when Notsha came into the world, it seemed as though a ball of flesh were turning in circles like a wheel, and the whole room was filled with strange fragrances and a crimson light. Li Dixing was much frightened and thought it was an apparition. He clove the circling ball with his sword, and out of it leaped a small boy whose whole body glowed with a crimson radiance. But his face was delicately shaped and white as snow. About his right arm he wore a golden armlet, and around his thighs was wound a length of crimson silk whose glittering shine dazzled the eyes. When Li Dixing saw the child, he took pity on him and did not slay him, while his wife began to love the boy dearly. When 3 days had passed, all his friends came to wish him joy. They were just sitting at the festival meal when a Taoist priest entered and said, "I am the Great One. This boy is the bright pearl of the beginning of things, bestowed upon you as your son. Yet the boy is wild and unruly, and will kill many men. Therefore I will take him as my pupil to gentle his savage ways." Li Dixing bowed his thanks, and the Great One disappeared. When Notsha was 7 years old, he once ran away from home. He came to the river of 9 bends, whose green waters flowed along between 2 rows of weeping willows. The day was hot, and Notcha entered the water to cool himself. He unbound his crimson silk cloth and whisked it about in the water to wash it. But while Notcha sat there and whisked about his scarf in the water, it shook the castle of the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea to its very foundations. So the Dragon King sent out a Triton, terrible to look upon, who was to find out what was the matter. When the Triton saw the boy, he began to scold. But the latter merely looked up and said, "What a strange-looking beast you are, and you can actually talk." Then the Triton grew enraged, leaped up and struck at Notcha with his axe. But the latter avoided the blow and threw his golden armlet at him. The armlet struck the Triton on the head, and he sank down dead. Notcha laughed and said, "And there he is gone and made my armlet bloody." And he once more sat down on a stone in order to wash his armlet. Then the crystal castle of the dragon began to tremble as though it were about to fall apart, and a watchman also came and reported that the Triton had been slain by a boy. So the Dragon King sent out his son to capture the boy. And the son seated himself on the water-cleaving beast and came up with a thunder of great waves of water. Notcha straightened up and said, "That is a big wave." Suddenly he saw a creature rise out of the waves, on whose back sat an armed man who cried in a loud voice, "Who has slain my Triton?" Notcha answered, "The Triton wanted to slay me, so I killed him. What difference does it make?" Then the dragon assailed him with his halberd. But Notcha said, "Tell me who you are before we fight." "I am the son of the Dragon King," was the reply. "And I am Notcha, the son of General Lidising. You must not rouse my anger with your violence, or I will skin you, together with that old mudfish, your father." Then the dragon grew wild with rage, and came storming along furiously. But Notcha cast his crimson cloth into the air, so that it flashed like a ball of fire, and cast the dragon youth from his breast. Then Notcha took his golden armlet and struck him on the forehead with it, so that he had to reveal himself in his true form as a golden dragon, and fall down dead. Notcha laughed and said, "I have heard tell that dragon sinews make good cords. I will draw one out and bring it to my father, and he can tie his armor together with it." And with that, he drew out the dragon's back sinew and took it home. In the meantime, the Dragon King, full of fury, had hastened to Notcha's father Li Dexing and demanded that Notcha be delivered up to him. But Li Dexing replied, "You must be mistaken, for my boy is only 7 years old and incapable of committing such misdeeds." While they were still quarreling, Notcha came running up and cried, "Father, I'm bringing along a dragon's sinew for you, so that you may bind up your armor with it." Now the dragon broke out into tears and furious scolding. He threatened to report Li Dexing to the ruler of the heaven, and took himself off, snorting with rage. Li Dexing grew very much excited, told his wife what had happened, and both began to weep. Notcha, however, came to them and said, "Why do you weep? I will just go to my master, the Great One, and he will know what is to be done." And no sooner had he said the words than he had disappeared. He came into his master's presence and told him the whole tale. The latter said, "You must get ahead of the dragon and prevent him from accusing you in heaven." Then he did some magic, and Notcha found himself set down by the gate of heaven, where he waited for the dragon. It was still early in the morning. The gate of heaven had not yet been opened, nor was the watchman at his post. But the dragon was already climbing up. Notcha, whom his master's magic had rendered invisible, threw the dragon to the ground with his armlet and began to pitch into him. The dragon scolded and screamed. "There the old worm flounders about," said Notcha, "and does not care how hard he is beaten. I will scratch off some of his scales." And with these words he began to tear open the dragon's festal garments, and rip off some of the scales beneath his left arm, so that the red blood dripped out. Then the dragon could no longer stand the pain, and begged for mercy. But first he had to promise Notchtja that he would not complain of him before the latter would let him go. And then the dragon had to turn himself into a little green snake, which Notchtja put into his sleeve and took back home with him. But no sooner had he drawn the little snake from his sleeve than it assumed human shape. The dragon then swore that he would punish Lidishing in a terrible manner, and disappeared in a flash of lightning. Lidishing was now angry with his son in earnest. Therefore, Notchtja's mother sent him to the rear of the house to keep out of his father's sight. Notchtja disappeared and went to his master, in order to ask him what he should do when the dragon returned. His master advised him, and Notchtja went back home. And all the dragon kings of the four seas were assembled, and had bound his parents with cries and tumult in order to punish them. Notchtja ran up and cried with a loud voice, "I will take the punishment for whatever I have done. My parents are blameless. What is the punishment you wish to lay upon me?" "Life for life," said the dragon. "Very well then, I will destroy myself." And so he did, and the dragons went off satisfied, while Notchtja's mother buried him with many tears. But the spiritual part of Notchtja, his soul, fluttered about in the air, and was driven by the wind to the cave of the Great One. He took it in and said to it, "You must appear to your mother. 40 miles distant from your home rises a green mountain cliff. On this cliff she must build a shrine for you. And after you have enjoyed the incense of human adoration for 3 years, you shall once more have a human body." Notchtja appeared to his mother in a dream, and gave her the whole message, and she awoke in tears. But Lidishing grew angry when she told him about it. "It serves the accursed boy right that he is dead. It is because you are always thinking of him that he appears to you in dreams. You must pay no attention to him." The woman said no more, but thenceforward he appeared to her daily, as soon as she closed her eyes, and grew more and more urgent in his demand. Finally, all that was left for her to do was to erect a temple for Notchtja without Lidishing's knowledge, and Notchtja performed great miracles in his temple. All prayers made in it were granted, and from far away people streamed to it to burn incense in his honor. Thus 1/2 a year passed. Then Lidishing, on the occasion of a great military drill, once came by the cliff in question, and saw the people crowding thickly about the hill like a swarm of ants. Lidishing inquired what there were to see upon the hill. "It is a new god, who performs so many miracles that people come from far and near to honor him." "What sort of a god is he?" asked Lidishing. They did not dare conceal from him who the god was. Then Lidishing grew angry. He spurred his horse up the hill, and, sure enough, over the door of the temple was written, "Notchtja's Shrine." And within it was the likeness of Notchtja, just as he had appeared while living. Lidishing said, "While you were alive, you brought misfortune to your parents. Now that you are dead, you deceive the people. It is disgusting." With these words he drew forth his whip, beat Notchtja's idolatrous likeness to pieces with it, had the temple burned down, and the worshippers mildly reproved. Then he returned home. Now Notchtja had been absent in the spirit upon that day. When he returned, he found his temple destroyed, and the spirit of the hill gave him the details. Notchtja hurried to his master, and related with tears what had befallen him. The latter was roused and said, "It is Lidishing's fault. After you had given back your body to your parents, you were no further concern of his. Why should he withdraw from you the enjoyment of the incense?" Then the Great One made a body of lotus plants, gave it the gift of life, and enclosed the soul of Notchtja within it. This done, he called out in a loud voice, "Arise!" A drawing of breath was heard, and Notcha leaped up once more in the shape of a small boy. He flung himself down before his master and thanked him. The latter bestowed upon him the magic of the fiery lance, and Notcha thenceforward had two whirling wheels beneath his feet, the wheel of the wind and the wheel of fire. With these he could rise up and down in the air. The master also gave him a bag of panther skin in which to keep his armlet and his silken cloth. Now, Notcha had determined to punish Li Deshing. Taking advantage of a moment when he was not watched, he went away, thundering along on his rolling wheels to Li Deshing's dwelling. The latter was unable to withstand him and fled. He was almost exhausted when his second son, Mucha, the disciple of the holy Pu Hain, came to his aid from the cave of the White Crane. A violent quarrel took place between the brothers. They began to fight, and Mucha was overcome, while Notcha once more rushed in pursuit of Li Deshing. At the height of his extremity, however, the holy Wen Deshu of the Hill of the Five Dragons, the master of Gincha, Li Jing's oldest son, stepped forth and hid Li Deshing in his cave. Notcha, in a rage, insisted that he be delivered up to him, but Wen Deshu said, "Elsewhere you may indulge your wild nature to your heart's content, but not in this place." And when Notcha, in the excess of his rage, turned his fiery lance upon him, Wen Deshu stepped back a pace, shook the 7-petaled lotus from his sleeve, and threw it into the air. A whirlwind arose, clouds and mists obscured the sight, and sand and earth were flung up from the ground. Then the whirlwind collapsed with a great crash. Notcha fainted, and when he regained consciousness, found himself bound to a golden column with 3 thongs of gold, so that he could no longer move. Wen Deshu now called Gincha to him and ordered him to give his unruly brother a good thrashing. And this he did, while Notcha, obliged to stand it, stood grinding his teeth. In his extremity he saw the Great One floating by and called out to him, "Save me, O master!" But the latter did not notice him. Instead, he entered the cave and thanked Wen Deshu for the severe lesson which he had given Notcha. Finally, they called Notcha in to them and ordered him to be reconciled to his father. Then they dismissed them both and seated themselves to play chess. But no sooner was Notcha free than he again fell into a rage and renewed his pursuit of his father. He had again overtaken Li Deshing when still another saint came forward to defend the latter. This time it was the old Buddha of the radiance of the light. When Notcha attempted to battle with him, he raised his arm, and a pagoda shaped itself out of red, whirling clouds and closed around Notcha. Then Radiance of Light placed both his hands on the pagoda, and a fire arose within it, which burned Notcha, so that he cried loudly for mercy. Then he had to promise to beg his father's forgiveness, and always to obey him in the future. Not till he had promised all this did the Buddha let him out of the pagoda again. And he gave the pagoda to Li Deshing, and taught him a magic saying which would give him the mastery over Notcha. It is for this reason that Li Deshing is called the pagoda, bearing King of Heaven. Later on, Li Deshing and his 3 sons, Gincha, Mucha, and Notcha, aided King Wu of the Deshu dynasty to destroy the tyrant Deshu Xin. None could withstand their might. Only once did a sorcerer succeed in wounding Notcha in the left arm. Any other would have died of the wound, but the Great One carried him into his cave, healed his wound, and gave him 3 goblets of the wine of the gods to drink, and 3 fire dates to eat. When Notcha had eaten and drunk, he suddenly heard a crash at his left side, and another arm grew out from it. He could not speak, and his eyes stood out from their sockets with horror. But it went on as it had begun. 6 more arms grew out of his body and 2 more heads, so that finally he had 3 heads and 8 arms. He called out to his master, "What does all this mean?" But the latter only laughed and said, "All is as it should be. Thus equipped you will really be strong." Then he taught him a magic incantation by means of which he could make his arms and heads visible or invisible as he chose. When the tyrant Diashu Sin had been destroyed, Li Dixing and his 3 sons, while still on earth, were taken up into heaven and seated among the gods. Note, Li Dixing, the pagoda bearing King of Heaven, may be traced back to Indra, the Hindu god of thunder and lightning. The pagoda might be an erroneous variant of the thunderbolt, Vajra. In such case, Notsha would be a personification of the thunder. The Great One, Tai-I, is the condition of things before their separation into the active and passive principles. There is a whole genealogy of mythical saints and holy men who took part in the battles between King Wu of Deshu and the tyrant Deshu Sin. These saints are, for the most part, Buddhist Brahminic figures which have been reshaped. The Dragon King of the Eastern Sea also occurs in the tale of Sun Wukong. No. 74. Dragon sinew means the spinal cord, the distinction between nerves and sinews not being carefully observed. 3 spirits and 7 souls. Man has 3 spirits, usually above his head, and 7 animal souls. Notsha had been absent in the spirit upon that day. The idol is only the seat of the Godhead, which the latter leaves or inhabits as he chooses. Therefore, the Godhead must be summoned when prayers are offered by means of bells and incense. When the God is not present, his idol is merely a block of wood or stone. Puhain, the Buddha of the lion, is the Indian Samantabhadra, one of the 4 great bodhisattvas of the Tantra school. Vendishu, the Buddha on the golden-haired mountain lion, Hu, is the Indian Manjushri. The old Buddha of the radiance of the light, Yandongofu, is the Indian Dipamkara, the Lady of the Moon. In the days of the Emperor Yao lived a prince by the name of Hu-I, who was a mighty hero and a good archer. Once 10 suns rose together in the sky and shone so brightly and burned so fiercely that the people on earth could not endure them. So the emperor ordered Hu-I to shoot at them. And Hu-I shot 9 of them down from the sky. Besides his bow, Hu-I also had a horse which ran so swiftly that even the wind could not catch up with it. He mounted it to go a-hunting, and the horse ran away and could not be stopped. So, I came to Kunlun Mountain and met the Queen Mother of the Jasper Sea, and she gave him the herb of immortality. He took it home with him and hid it in his room. But his wife, who was named Chung, once ate some of it on the sly when he was not at home, and she immediately floated up to the clouds. When she reached the moon, she ran into the castle there and has lived there ever since as the Lady of the Moon. On a night in mid-autumn, an emperor of the Tang dynasty once sat at wine with 2 sorcerers, and one of them took his bamboo staff and cast it into the air, where it turned into a heavenly bridge, on which the 3 climbed up to the moon together. There they saw a great castle, on which was inscribed, "The spreading halls of crystal cold." Beside it stood a cassia tree, which blossomed and gave forth a fragrance filling all the air. And in the tree sat a man who was chopping off the smaller boughs with an axe. One of the sorcerers said, "That is the man in the moon." The cassia tree grows so luxuriantly that in the course of time it would overshadow all the moon's radiance. Therefore, it has to be cut down once in every 1,000 years. Then they entered the spreading halls. The silver stories of the castle towered one above the other, and its walls and columns were all formed of liquid crystal. In the walls were cages and ponds, where fishes and birds moved as though alive. The whole moon world seemed made of glass. While they were still looking about them on all sides, the Lady of the Moon stepped up to them, clad in a white mantle and a rainbow-colored gown. She smiled and said to the Emperor, "You are a prince of the mundane world of dust. Great is your fortune, since you have been able to find your way here." And she called for her attendants, who came flying up on white birds and sang and danced beneath the cassia tree. A pure, clear music floated through the air. Beside the tree stood a mortar made of white marble in which a jasper rabbit ground up herbs. That was the dark half of the moon. When the dance had ended, the Emperor returned to earth again with the sorcerers, and he had the songs which he had heard on the moon written down and sung to the accompaniment of flutes of jasper in his pear-tree garden. Note, this fairy tale is traditional. The archer. Hu, high or count-high, the archer prince, comp. De shuang, de shi, is placed by legend in different epochs. He also occurs in connection with the myths regarding the moon, for one tale recounts how he saved the moon during an eclipse by means of his arrows. The queen mother is Si Wang Mu Kump, with Nam. 15. The Tang dynasty reigned 680–906 AD. The spreading halls of crystal cold. The goddess of the ice also has her habitation in the moon. The hare in the moon is a favorite figure. He grinds the grains of maturity or the herbs that make the elixir of life. The rain toad, Chan, who has 3 legs, is also placed on the moon. According to one version of the story, Chang-O took the shape of this toad. Illustration beside it. Stood, a cassia tree. Page 54. The morning and the evening star. Once upon a time there were 2 stars, sons of the golden king of the heavens. The one was named Chen and the other Shen. One day they quarreled, and Chen struck Shen a terrible blow. Thereupon both stars made a vow that they would never again look upon each other. So Chen only appears in the evening, and Shen only appears in the morning, and not until Chen has disappeared is Shen again to be seen. And that is why people say, when 2 brothers do not live peaceably with one another, they are like Chen and Shen. Note, Chen and Shen are Hesperus and Lucifer, the morning and evening stars. The tale is told in its traditional form. In the dim ages of the past, there once was an old man who went on a journey. No one remained at home save his only daughter and a white stallion. The daughter fed the horse day by day, but she was lonely and yearned for her father. So it happened that one day she said in jest to the horse, "If you will bring back my father to me, then I will marry you." No sooner had the horse heard her say this than he broke loose and ran away. He ran until he came to the place where her father was. When her father saw the horse, he was pleasantly surprised, caught him, and seated himself on his back. And the horse turned back the way he had come, neighing without a pause. "What can be the matter with the horse?" thought the father. "Something must have surely gone wrong at home." So he dropped the reins and rode back, and he fed the horse liberally because he had been so intelligent. But the horse ate nothing, and when he saw the girl, he struck out at her with his hoofs and tried to bite her. This surprised the father. He questioned his daughter, and she told him the truth, just as it had occurred. "You must not say a word about it to anyone," spoke her father, "or else people will talk about us." And he took down his crossbow, shot the horse, and hung up his skin in the yard to dry. Then he went on his travels again. One day his daughter went out walking with the daughter of a neighbor. When they entered the yard, She pushed the horsehide with her foot and said, "What an unreasonable animal, you are wanting to marry a human being. What happened to you served you right." But before she had finished her speech, the horsehide moved, rose up, wrapped itself about the girl, and ran off. Horrified, her companion ran home to her father and told him what had happened. The neighbors looked for the girl everywhere, but she could not be found. At last, some days afterward, they saw the girl hanging from the branches of a tree, still wrapped in the horsehide, and gradually she turned into a silkworm and wove a cocoon. And the threads which she spun were strong and thick. Her girlfriend then took down the cocoon and let her slip out of it, and then she spun the silk and sold it at a large profit. But the girl's relatives longed for her greatly. So one day, the girl appeared riding in the clouds on her horse, followed by a great company, and said, "In heaven, I have been assigned to the task of watching over the growing of silkworms. You must yearn for me no longer." And thereupon they built temples to her in her native land, and every year, at the silkworm season, sacrifices are offered to her, and her protection is implored. And the silkworm goddess is also known as the girl with the horse's head. Note, this tale is placed in the times of the Emperor Hao, and the legend seems to have originated in Szechuan. The stallion is the sign of the zodiac which rules the springtime, the season when the silkworms are cultivated. Hence, she is called the goddess with the horse's head. The legend itself tells a different tale. In addition to this goddess, the spouse of Shen Nung, the divine husbandman, is also worshipped as the goddess of silkworm culture. The goddess with the horse's head is more of a totemic representation of the silkworm as such, while the wife of Shen Nung is regarded as the protecting goddess of silk culture and is supposed to have been the first to teach women its details. The spouse of the Yellow Lord is mentioned in the same connection. The popular belief distinguishes three goddesses who protect the silkworm culture in turn. The second is the best of the three, and when it is her year, the silk turns out well. The Queen of Heaven. The Queen of Heaven, who is also known as the Holy Mother, was in mortal life a maiden of Fuken named Lin. She was pure, reverential, and pious in her ways, and died at the age of 17. She shows her power on the seas, and for this reason the seamen worship her. When they are unexpectedly attacked by wind and waves, they call on her, and she is always ready to hear their pleas. There are many seamen in Fuken, and every year people are lost at sea. And because of this, most likely, the Queen of Heaven took pity on the distress of her people during her lifetime on earth. And since her thoughts are uninterruptedly turned toward aiding the drowning in their distress, she now appears frequently on the seas. In every ship that sails a picture of the Queen of Heaven hangs in the cabin, and 3 paper talismans are also kept on shipboard. On the first, she is painted with crown and scepter, on the second as a maiden in ordinary dress, and on the third she is pictured with flowing hair, barefoot, standing with a sword in her hand. When the ship is in danger, the first talisman is burnt and help comes. But if this is of no avail, then the second and finally the third picture is burned. And if no help comes, then there is nothing more to be done. When seamen lose their course among wind and waves and darkling clouds, they pray devoutly to the Queen of Heaven. Then a red lantern appears on the face of the waters, and if they follow the lantern, they will win safe out of all danger. The Queen of Heaven may often be seen standing in the skies, dividing the wind with her sword. When she does this, the wind departs for the north and south, and the waves grow smooth. A wooden wand is always kept before her holy picture in the cabin. It often happens that the fish dragons play in the seas. They are two giant fish who spout up water against one another till the sun in the sky is obscured, and the seas are shrouded in profound darkness. And often, in the distance, one may see a bright opening in the darkness. If the ship holds a course straight for this opening, it will win through, and is suddenly floating in calm waters again. Looking back, one may see the two fishes still spouting water, and the ship will have passed directly beneath their jaws. But a storm is always near when the fish dragons swim. Therefore, it is well to burn paper or wool, so that the dragons do not draw the ship down into the depths. Or the master of the wand may burn incense before the wand in the cabin. Then he must take the wand and swing it over the water 3 times in a circle. If he does so, the dragons will draw in their tails and disappear. When the ashes in the censer fly up into the air without any cause and are scattered about, it is a sign that great danger is threatening. Nearly 200 years ago, an army was fitted out to subdue the island of Formosa. The captain's banner had been dedicated with the blood of a white horse. Suddenly, the Queen of Heaven appeared at the tip of the banner staff. In another moment, she had disappeared, but the invasion was successful. On another occasion, in the days of Qianlong, the minister Juling was ordered to install a new king in the Liu-Qiu Islands. When the fleet was sailing by south of Korea, a storm arose, and his ship was driven toward the black whirlpool. The water had the color of ink. Sun and moon lost their radiance, and the word was passed about that the ship had been caught in the black whirlpool from which no living man had ever returned. The seamen and travellers awaited their end with lamentations. Suddenly, an untold number of lights, like red lanterns, appeared on the surface of the water. Then the seamen were overjoyed and prayed in the cabins. "Our lives are saved!" they cried. "The Holy Mother has come to our aid!" And truly, a beautiful maiden with golden earrings appeared. She waved her hand in the air, and the winds became still, and the waves grew even, and it seemed as though the ship were being drawn along by a mighty hand. It moved, plashing through the waves, and suddenly it was beyond the limits of the black whirlpool. The Shuling, on his return, told of this happening, and begged that temples be erected in honor of the Queen of Heaven, and that she be included in the list of the gods. And the emperor granted his prayer. Since then, temples of the Queen of Heaven are to be found in all seaport towns, and her birthday is celebrated on the 8th day of the 4th month with spectacles and sacrifices. Note: the Queen of Heaven, whose name is Tianhu, or more exactly, Tian Feniangyang, is a Taoist goddess of seamen, generally worshipped in all coast towns. Her story is principally made up of local legends of Fujian province, and a variation of the Indian Marichi, who, as Deshunti with the 8 arms, is the object of quite a special cult. Tianhu, since the establishment of the Manchu dynasty, is one of the officially recognized godheads. The fire god. Long before the time of Fu Hai, Dishu Yung, the magic welder, was the ruler of men. He discovered the use of fire, and succeeding generations learned from him to cook their food. Hence, his descendants were entrusted with the preservation of fire, while he himself was made the fire god. He is a personification of the Red Lord, who showed himself at the beginning of the world as one of the 5 ancients. The fire god is worshipped as the lord of the holy southern mountain. In the skies, the fiery star, the southern quarter of the heavens, and the red bird belong to his domain. When there is danger of fire, the fiery star glows with a peculiar radiance. When countless numbers of fire crows fly into a house, a fire is sure to break out in it. In the land of the 4 rivers there dwelt a man who was very rich. One day he got into his wagon and set out on a long journey, and he met a girl dressed in red who begged him to take her with him. He allowed her to get into the wagon and drove along for half a day without even looking in her direction. Then the girl got out again and said in farewell, "You are truly a good and honest man, and for that reason I must tell you the truth. I am the fire god. Tomorrow a fire will break out in your house. Hurry home at once to arrange your affairs and save what you can." Frightened, the man faced his horses about and drove home as fast as he could. All that he possessed in the way of treasures, clothes, and jewels he removed from the house. And when he was about to lie down to sleep, a fire broke out on the hearth which could not be quenched until the whole building had collapsed in dust and ashes. Yet, thanks to the fire god, the man had saved all his movable belongings. Note the fire god, comp, with num. 15. The holy southern mountain is Sangshan in Huan. The fiery star is Mars. The constellations of the southern quarter of the heavens are grouped by the Chinese as under the name of the Red Bird. The land of the 4 rivers is Sichuan, in the western part of present-day China. China. The 3 ruling gods. There are 3 lords in heaven and on the earth and in the waters, and they are known as the 3 ruling gods. They are all brothers and are descended from the father of the monk of the Yangtze Kiang. When the latter was sailing on the river, he was cast into the water by a robber. But he did not drown, for a Triton came his way, who took him along with him to the dragon castle. And when the Dragon King saw him, he realized at once that there was something extraordinary about the monk, and he married him to his daughter. From their early youth, his 3 sons showed a preference for the hidden wisdom, and together they went to an island in the sea. There they seated themselves and began to meditate. They heard nothing, they saw nothing, they spoke not a word, and they did not move. The birds came and nested in their hair. The spiders came and wove webs across their faces. Worms and insects came and crawled in and out of their noses and ears. But they paid no attention to any of them. After they had meditated thus for a number of years, they obtained the hidden wisdom and became gods. And the Lord made them the 3 ruling gods. The heavens make things, the earth completes things, and the waters create things. The 3 ruling gods sent out the current of their primal power to aid in ordering all to this end. Therefore, they are also known as the primal gods, and temples are erected to them all over the earth. If you go into a temple, you will find the 3 ruling gods all seated on one pedestal. They wear women's hats upon their heads and hold scepters in their hands, like kings. But he who sits on the last place, to the right, has glaring eyes and wears a look of rage. If you ask why this is, you are told, these 3 were brothers, and the Lord made them the ruling gods. So they talked about the order in which they were to sit. And the youngest said, "Tomorrow morning, before sunrise, we will meet here. Whoever gets here first shall have the seat of honor in the middle. The second one to arrive shall have the second place, and the third, the third." The 2 older brothers were satisfied. The next morning, very early, the youngest came first, seated himself in the middle place, and became the god of the waters. The middle brother came next, sat down on the left, and became the god of the heavens. Last of all came the oldest brother. When he saw that his brothers were already sitting in their places, he was disgusted, and yet he could not say a word. His face grew red with rage. His eyeballs stood forth from their sockets like bullets, and his veins swelled like bladders. And he seated himself on the right and became god of the earth. The artisans who make the images of the gods notice this, so they always represent him thus. Note, the three ruling gods is set down as told by the people. It is undoubtedly a version of the Indian Trimurti. The meaning of the terrible appearance of the third godhead, evidently no longer understood by the people, points to Siva and has given rise to the fairy tale here told. As regards the monk of the Yangtze Kiang, comp. with number 69. A Legend of Confucius. When Confucius came to the earth, the Qilin, that strange beast which is the prince of all four-footed animals, and only appears when there is a great man on earth, sought the child and spat out a jade whereon was written, "Son of the water crystal, you are destined to become an uncrowned king." And Confucius grew up, studied diligently, learned wisdom, and came to be a saint. He did much good on earth, and ever since his death has been reverenced as the greatest of teachers and masters. He had foreknowledge of many things, and even after he had died he gave evidence of this. Once, when the wicked Emperor Qin Shi Huang had conquered all the other kingdoms and was travelling through the entire empire, he came to the homeland of Confucius, and he found his grave. And, finding his grave, he wished to have it opened and see what was in it. All his officials advised him not to do so, but he would not listen to them. So a passage was dug into the grave, and in its main chamber they found a coffin, whose wood appeared to be quite fresh. When struck, it sounded like metal. To the left of the coffin was a door, which led into an inner chamber. In this chamber stood a bed and a table with books and clothing, all as though meant for the use of a living person. Qin Shi Huang seated himself on the bed and looked down, and there on the floor stood 2 shoes of red silk whose tips were adorned with a woven pattern of clouds. A bamboo staff leaned against the wall. The emperor, in jest, put on the shoes, took the staff, and left the grave. But as he did so, a tablet suddenly appeared before his eyes on which stood the following lines: "O'er kingdoms, 6. Qin Shi Huang his army led. To ope my grave and find my humble bed, he steals my shoes and takes my staff away, to reach Shakyu and his last earthly day." Qin Shi Huang was much alarmed, and had the grave closed again. But when he reached Shakyu, he fell ill of a hasty fever, of which he died. Note, the Qilin is an okapi-like legendary beast of the most perfected kindness, prince of all the four-footed animals. The water crystal is the dark lord of the north, whose element is water and wisdom, for which last reason Confucius is termed his son. Qin Shi Huang, BC 200, is the burner of books and reorganizer of China, famed in history. Shakyu, Sandhill, was a city in the western part of the China of that day. The god of war, Guan Di, was really named Guan Yu. At the time when the rebellion of the Yellow Turbans was raging throughout the empire, he, together with 2 others whom he met by the wayside, and who were inspired with the same love of country which possessed him, made a pact of friendship. One of the 2 was Liu Bi, afterward emperor. The other was named Di Shangfei. The 3 met in a peach orchard and swore to be brothers one to the other, although they were of different families. They sacrificed a white steed and vowed to be true to each other to the death. Guan Yu was faithful, honest, upright and brave beyond all measure. He loved to read Confucius's Annals of Lu, which tell of the rise and fall of empires. He aided his friend Liu Bei to subdue the Yellow Turbans and to conquer the land of the Four Rivers. The horse he rode was known as the Red Hare and could run 1,000 miles in a day. Guan Yu had a knife shaped like a half moon, which was called the Green Dragon. His eyebrows were beautiful, like those of the silk butterflies, and his eyes were long slitted like the eyes of the phoenix. His face was scarlet red in color, and his beard so long that it hung down over his stomach. Once, when he appeared before the emperor, the latter called him Duke Fairbeard, and presented him with a silken pocket in which to place his beard. He wore a garment of green brocade. Whenever he went into battle, he showed invincible bravery. Whether he were opposed by 1,000 armies or by 10,000 horsemen, he attacked them as though they were merely air. Once the evil Xiao had incited the enemies of his master, the emperor, to take the city by treachery. When Guan Yu heard of it, he hastened up with an army to relieve the town. But he fell into an ambush and, together with his son, was brought a captive to the capital of the enemy's land. The prince of that country would have been glad to have had him go over to his side, but Guan Yu swore that he would not yield to death himself. Thereupon, father and son were slain. When he was dead, his horse Red Hare ceased to eat and died. A faithful captain of his, by name of Deshu Desang, who was black-visaged and wore a great knife, had just invested a fortress when the news of the sad end of the Duke reached him, and he, as well as other faithful followers, would not survive their master, and perished. At the time, a monk, who was an old compatriot and acquaintance of Duke Guan, was living in the hills of the Jade Fountains. He used to walk at night in the moonlight. Suddenly he heard a loud voice cry down out of the air, "I want my head back again." The monk looked up and saw Duke Guan, sword in hand, seated on his horse, just as he appeared while living. And at his right and left hand, shadowy figures in the clouds, stood his son, Guan Ping, and his captain, Deshu Desang. The monk folded his hands and said, "While you lived, you were upright and faithful, and in death you have become a wise god, and yet you do not understand fate. If you insist on having your head back again, to whom shall the many thousands of your enemies who lost their lives through you appeal in order to have life restored to them?" When he heard this, the Duke Guan bowed and disappeared. Since that time he has been without interruption, spiritually active. Whenever a new dynasty is founded, his holy form may be seen. For this reason, temples and sacrifices have been instituted for him, and he has been made one of the gods of the empire. Like Confucius, he received the great sacrifice of oxen, sheep, and pigs. His rank increases with the passing of centuries. First he was worshipped as Prince Guan, later as King Guan, and then as the great god who conquers the demons. The last dynasty, finally, worships him as the great divine helper of the heavens. He is also called the god of war, and is a strong deliverer in all need, when men are plagued by devils and foxes. Together with Confucius, the master of peace, he is often worshipped as the master of war. Note: the Chinese god of war is a historical personality from the epoch of the Three Empires, which later joined the Han dynasty, about 250 AD. Yu Bi founded the Little Han dynasty in Sichuan with the aid of Guan Yu and Dishangfei. Guan Yu, or Guan Di, i.e. Gojuan, has become one of the most popular figures in Chinese legend in the course of time, god of war and deliverer in one and the same person. The talk of the monk with the god Guan Di in the clouds is based on the Buddhist law of karma, because Guan Di Even though his motives might be good, had slain other men, he must endure like treatment at their hands, even while he is a god. Tales of saints and magicians. The halos of the saints. The true gods all have halos around their heads. When the lesser gods and demons see these halos, they hide and dare not move. The master of the heavens on the dragon. Tiger Mountain meets the gods at all times. One day, the god of war came down to the mountain, while the mandarin of the neighboring district was visiting the master of the heavens. The latter advised the mandarin to withdraw and hide himself in an inner chamber. Then he went out to receive the god of war. But the mandarin peeped through a slit in the door, and he saw the red face and green garment of the god of war as he stood there, terrible and awe-inspiring. Suddenly, a red halo flashed up above his head, whose beams penetrated into the inner chamber, so that the mandarin grew blind in one eye. After a time, the god of war went away again, and the master of the heavens accompanied him. Suddenly Guandi said with alarm, "Confucius is coming!" The halo he wears illumines the whole world. I cannot endure its radiance even 1,000 miles away, so I must hurry and get out of the way. And with that he stepped into a cloud and disappeared. The master of the heavens then told the mandarin what had happened, and added, "Fortunately you did not see the god of war face to face. Whoever does not possess the greatest virtue and the greatest wisdom would be melted by the red glow of his halo." So saying, he gave him a pill of the elixir of life to eat, and his blind eye gradually regained its sight. It is also said that scholars wear a red halo around their heads, which devils, foxes, and ghosts fear when they see it. There was once a scholar who had a fox for a friend. The fox came to see him at night and went walking with him in the villages. They could enter the houses and see all that was going on without people being any the wiser. But when at a distance the fox saw a red halo hanging above a house, he would not enter it. The scholar asked him why not. "Those are all celebrated scholars," answered the fox. "The greater the halo, the more extensive is their knowledge. I dread them and do not dare enter their houses." Then the man said, "But I am a scholar, too. Have I no halo which makes you fear me instead of going walking with me?" "There is only a black mist about your head," answered the fox. "I have never yet seen it surrounded by a halo." The scholar was mortified and began to scold him. But the fox disappeared with a hoarse laugh. Note: this tale is told as traditionally handed down. The master of the heavens, Tianxi, who dwells on the Longhu Shan, is the so-called Taoist Pope. Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is really older than heaven and earth put together. He is the Yellow Lord or Ancient who created this world together with the other four. At various times he has appeared on earth under various names. His most celebrated incarnation, however, is that of Lao Tzu, the old child, which name he was given because he made his appearance on earth with white hair. He acquired all sorts of magic powers by means of which he extended his lifespan. Once he hired a servant to do his bidding. He agreed to give him 100 pieces of copper daily, yet he did not pay him. And finally, he owed him 7,200,000 pieces of copper. Then he mounted a black steer and rode to the west. He wanted to take his servant along, but when they reached the Han-Gu Pass, the servant refused to go further and insisted on being paid. Yet Lao Tzu gave him nothing. When they came to the house of the guardian of the pass, red clouds appeared in the sky. The guardian understood this sign and knew that a holy man was drawing near. So he went out to meet him and took him into his house. He questioned him with regard to hidden knowledge, but Lao Tse only stuck out his tongue at him and would not say a word. Nevertheless, the guardian of the pass treated him with the greatest respect in his home. Lao Tse's servant told the servant of the guardian that his master owed him a great deal of money and begged the latter to put in a good word for him. When the guardian's servant heard how large a sum it was, he was tempted to win so wealthy a man for a son-in-law, and he married him to his daughter. Finally, the guardian heard of the matter and came to Lao Tse together with the servant. Then Lao Tse said to his servant, "You rascally servant, you really should have been dead long ago. I hired you, and since I was poor and could give you no money, I gave you a life-giving talisman to eat. That is how you still happen to be alive. I said to you, if you will follow me into the West, the land of blessed repose, I will pay you your wages in yellow gold. But you did not wish to do this." And with that he patted his servant's neck. Thereupon the latter opened his mouth and spat out the life-giving talisman. The magic signs written on it with cinnabar, quite fresh and well-preserved, might still be seen. But the servant suddenly collapsed and turned into a heap of dry bones. Then the guardian of the pass cast himself to earth and pleaded for him. He promised to pay the servant for Lao Tse and begged the latter to restore him to life. So Lao Tse placed the talisman among the bones, and at once the servant came to life again. The guardian of the pass paid him his wages and dismissed him. Then he adored Lao Tse as his master, and the latter taught him the art of eternal life and left him his teachings in 5,000 words, which the guardian wrote down. The book which thus came into being is the Tao Te King, the book of the way and life. Lao Tse then disappeared from the eyes of men. The guardian of the pass, however, followed his teachings and was given a place among the immortals. Note: the Taoists like to assert that Lao Tse's journey to the West was undertaken before the birth of Buddha, who, according to many, is only a reincarnation of Lao Tse. The guardian of the Hangu Pass is mentioned by the name of Guanyin Hai in the Lia Jishi and the Dushuang Dishi. Once upon a time, there was a man named Huang An. He must have been well over 80, and yet he looked like a youth. He lived on cinnabar and wore no clothing. Even in winter, he went about without garments. He sat on a tortoise 3 feet long. Once he was asked, "About how old might this tortoise be?" He answered, "When Fu He first invented fish nets and eel pots, he caught this tortoise and gave it to me. And since then, I have worn its shield quite flat, sitting on it. The creature dreads the radiance of the sun and moon, so it only sticks its head out of its shell once in 2,000 years. Since I have had the beast, it has already stuck its head out 5 times. With these words he took his tortoise on his back and went off. And the legend arose that this man was 10,000 years old. Note: cinnabar is frequently used in the preparation of the elixir of life. Comp. No. 30. Fu. He is the life-breathing breath. Tortoises live to a great age. There is a legend which declares that 8 immortals dwell in the heavens. The first is named Dishung Liquan. He lived in the time of the Han dynasty and discovered the wonderful magic of golden cinnabar, the philosopher's stone. He could melt quicksilver and burn lead and turn them into yellow gold and white silver. And he could fly through the air in his human form. He is the chief of the 8 immortals. The second is named Di Shang Go. In primal times he gained hidden knowledge. It is said that he was really a white bat who turned into a man. In the first days of the Tang dynasty, an ancient with a white beard and a bamboo drum on his back was seen riding backward on a black ass in the town of Chang'an. He beat the drum and sang, and called himself Old Dishango. Another legend says that he always had a white mule with him, which could cover 1,000 miles in a single day. When he had reached his destination, he would fold up the animal and put it in his trunk. When he needed it again, he would sprinkle water on it with his mouth, and the beast would regain its first shape. The third is named Lu Yuan, or Lu Dongbin, the mountain guest. His real name was Li, and he belonged to the ruling Tang dynasty. But when the Empress Wu seized the throne and destroyed the Li family to almost the last man, he fled with his wife into the heart of the mountains. They changed their names to Lu, and, since they lived in hiding in the caverns and the rocks, he called himself the Mountain Guest, or the Guest of the Rocks. He lived on air and ate no bread. Yet he was fond of flowers, and in the course of time he acquired the hidden wisdom. In Luoyang, the capital city, the peonies bloomed with special luxuriance. And there dwelt a flower fairy, who changed herself into a lovely maiden with whom Guest of the Rocks, when he came to Luoyang, was wont to converse. Suddenly along came the yellow dragon, who had taken the form of a handsome youth. He mocked the flower fairy. Guest of the Rocks grew furious and cast his flying sword at him, cutting off his head. From that time onward, he fell back again into the world of mundane pleasure and death. He sank down into the dust of the diurnal, and was no longer able to wing his way to the upper regions. Later, he met Dushung Li Quan, who delivered him, and then he was taken up in the ranks of the immortals. Wilhelm was his disciple. This was an old willow tree which had drawn into itself the most ethereal powers of the sun rays and the moonbeams, and had thus been able to assume the shape of a human being. His face is blue, and he has red hair. Guest of the Rocks received him as a disciple. Emperors and kings of future times honor Guest of the Rocks as the ancestor and master of the pure sun. The people call him Grandfather Lu. He is very wise and powerful, and therefore the people still stream into Grandfather Lu's temples to obtain oracles and pray for good luck. If you want to know whether you will be successful or not in an undertaking, go to the temple, light incense, and bow your head to earth. On the altar is a bamboo goblet, in which are some dozens of little lottery sticks. You must shake them while kneeling until one of the sticks flies out. On the lottery stick is inscribed a number. This number must then be looked up in the Book of Oracles, where it is accompanied by a 4-line stanza. It is said that fortune and misfortune, strange to think, occur to one just as foretold by the oracle. The fourth immortal is Sao Guo Gui, Sao the uncle of the state. He was the younger brother of the Empress Sao, who for a time ruled the land. For this reason he was called the uncle of the state. From his earliest youth he had been a lover of the hidden wisdom. Riches and honors were no more to him than dust. It was Dushung Li Quan who aided him to become immortal. The fifth is called Lan Sai Ho. Nothing is known of his true name, his time, nor his family. He was often seen in the marketplace, clad in a torn blue robe and wearing only a single shoe, beating a block of wood and singing the nothingness of life. The sixth immortal is known as Li Tiaguai, Li with the iron crutch. He lost his parents in early youth and was brought up in his older brother's home. His sister-in-law treated him badly and never gave him enough to eat. Because of this, he fled into the hills and there learned the hidden wisdom. Once he returned in order to see his brother, and said to his sister-in-law, "Give me something to eat," she answered. "There is no kindling wood on hand." He replied, "You need only to prepare the rice. I can use my leg for kindling wood, only you must not say that the fire might injure me. And if you do not, no harm will be done." His sister-in-law wished to see his art, so she poured the rice into the pot. Li stretched one of his legs out under it and lit it. The flames leaped high, and the leg burned like coal. When the rice was nearly boiled, his sister-in-law said, "Won't your leg be injured?" And Li replied angrily, "Did I not warn you not to say anything? Then no harm would have been done. Now one of my legs is lamed." With these words, he took an iron poker and fashioned it into a crutch for himself. Then he hung a bottle gourd on his back and went into the hills to gather medicinal herbs. And that is why he is known as Li with the iron crutch. It is also told of him that he often was in the habit of ascending into the heavens in the spirit to visit his master, Lotse. Before he left, he would order a disciple to watch his body and soul within it, so that the latter did not escape. Should 7 days have gone by without his spirit returning, then he would allow his soul to leave the empty tenement. Unfortunately, after 6 days had passed, the disciple was called to the deathbed of his mother, and when the master's spirit returned on the evening of the 7th day, the life had gone out of its body. Since there was no place for his spirit in his own body, in his despair he seized upon the first handy body from which the vital essence had not yet dispersed. It was the body of a neighbor, a lame cripple who had just died, so that from that time on the master appeared in his form. The 7th immortal is called Hang Xiang Dixi. He was the nephew of the famous Confucian scholar Han Yu of the Tang dynasty. From his earliest youth he cultivated the arts of the deathless gods, left his home and became a Taoist. Grandfather Lu awakened him and raised him to the heavenly world. Once he saved his uncle's life. The latter had been driven from court because he had objected when the emperor sent for a bone of Buddha with great pomp. When he reached the Blue Pass in his flight, a deep snowfall had made the road impassable. His horse had floundered in a snowdrift, and he himself was well nigh frozen. Then Hang Xiang Dixi suddenly appeared, helped him and his horse out of the drift, and brought them safely to the nearest inn along the Blue Pass. Han Yu sang a verse, in which the lines occurred, "Chin Ling Hill mid clouds doth lie, and home is far beyond my sight. Round the Blue Pass snow towers high, and who will lead the horse aright?" Suddenly it occurred to him that several years before, Hang Xiang Dixi had come to his house to congratulate him on his birthday. Before he had left, he had written these words on a slip of paper, and his uncle had read them without grasping their meaning. And now he was unconsciously singing the very lines of that song that his nephew had written. "So," he said to Hang Xiang Dixi, with a sigh, "you must be one of the immortals, since you were able thus to foretell the future." And thrice Hang Xiang Dixi sought to deliver his wife from the bonds of earth. For when he left his home to seek the hidden wisdom, she sat all day long yearning for his presence. Hang Xiang Dixi wished to release her into immortality, but he feared she was not capable of translation. So he appeared to her in various forms in order to try her, once as a beggar, another time as a wandering monk. But his wife did not grasp her opportunities. At last he took the shape of a lame Taoist who sat on a mat, beat a block of wood and read sutras before the house. His wife said, "My husband is not at home. I can give you nothing." The Taoist answered, "I do not want your gold and silver. I want you. Sit down beside me on the mat, and we will fly up into the air, and you shall find your husband again." Hereupon the woman grew angry and struck at him with a cudgel. Then Hang Xiang Dishi changed himself into his true form, stepped on a shining cloud, and was carried aloft. His wife looked after him and wept loudly, but he had disappeared and was not seen again. The eighth immortal is a girl, and was called Hoshian Gu. She was a peasant's daughter, and though her stepmother treated her harshly, she remained respectful and industrious. She loved to give alms, though her stepmother tried to prevent her. Yet she was never angry, even when her stepmother beat her. She had sworn not to marry, and at last her stepmother did not know what to do with her. One day, while she was cooking rice, Grandfather Du came and delivered her. She was still holding the rice spoon in her hand as she ascended into the air. In the heavens, she was appointed to sweep up the fallen flowers at the southern gate of heaven. Note, the legends of the 8 immortals, regarded as one group, do not go back further than the Manchu dynasty, though individual ones among them were known before. Some of the immortals, like Han Xiang Dixi, are historic personages, others purely mythical. In the present day, they play an important part in art and in the art crafts. Their emblems also occur frequently. Shum Li Quan is represented with a fan. Dishyang. Go has a bamboo drum with 2 drumsticks and his donkey. Lu Dongbin has a sword and a flower basket on his back. Sao Guogui has 2 small boards, Yin Yang Bang, which he can throw into the air. Li Tiaguai has the bottle gourd, out of which emerges a bat, the emblem of good fortune. Lan Sai Ho, who is also pictured as a woman, has a flute. Han Xiang Ci has a flower basket and a dibble. Ho Xian Gu has a spoon, usually formed in the shape of a lotus flower.